They stole my life in the thin hours between midnight and dawn and then smiled when I called it theft. That is the sentence I want you to hold for the next 8 minutes. They stole my life and called it protection. My name is Jonah Reed, and this is the story of how the two people who gave me my first shoes tried to pick clean the man who bought them. This is a story about betrayal, about the slow arithmetic of trust, and about the particular kind of revenge that doesn't scream. It arrives precise, legal, surgical, and it leaves you with the bill and the quiet satisfaction of a closed door. I drove down from Denver with the highway shimmering like a mirage under the noon sun, air conditioning full blast because the heat makes thinking feel like a thin thing. Dr. Carver had said go with clear boundaries. No expectations. I told myself it was research, impartial, clinical. I told myself I would be the unemotional observer who checks the temperature and leaves. Colorado Springs looked exactly like the brochure. Tidy roofs, manicured lawns, a pool that held the sky like a secret. Up close, the place was a stern set, granite floors, a fireplace that looked bought from an interiors catalog, recessed lights that flattened faces. I stood on the driveway a beat longer than I should have, cataloging the polish, tasting the old question in my mouth, if you're broke, why do you look like a catalog? Evelyn's voice was all perfume and high hospitality when she saw me, arms open, the smile practiced to fold like a napkin. Martin was behind her, shirt starched, dealer smile charm in place, the kind of men who sell used cars and themselves by the minute. The backyard was loud and warm with cousins and paper plates and the smell of charcoal and potato salad. Luca, my cousin, flashed the corner of a brand new laptop still wearing its store stickers like a guilty pleasure. Gareth, Uncle Gareth, told a story about sunsets the way people sell paradise, almost fake, they were so perfect. It was all performance and light and small metal things being shown and admired. They asked the usual things, the ones that cut just under the surface. How much are you making? Do you have savings? When are you renting your own studio? Evelyn held her wine like a microphone and drilled with a smile. Martin leaned in as if offering me a car deal, as if my life could be translated into payments and interest rates. Theo, my oldest friend, hovered with a plate. He said something quiet to me, the sort of whisper that tries to act casual and then fails. Something's been off. They've been asking me all week about you, what you save, what you invest. I smiled because smiling is portable and cheap, and I wanted to keep the room from sensing what hummed under my ribs. We ate. Someone told a story that made people laugh and the sound pooled like a warm bath around the table. My first sip of red tasted too sharp. I remember the way the light on the pool made everything look melted and luxurious. I remember my mother pouring, not asking, refilling my glass. I remember the couch meeting me like an old gilt and the ceiling stretching and thinning. I woke to a silence, the kind that comes just before the whole world knows something it did not the day before. My phone buzzed. I unlocked it like a soldier checking orders, and the numbers did not compute at first. $82,000 vanished overnight. Yesterday's total read like a typo, today it was a snip. My scalp went cold, and for a second the world tilted in that private way it does when a long story you've been narrating to yourself gets cut off mid-sentence. Memory doesn't return in tidy scenes, it returns as sound and texture. The crack of a ceramic piggy bank when I was 7, Martin's voice explaining away the rubble, I'll pay you back double. Revenge, in the end, was not what I thought when I was a boy imagining payback. It wasn't dramatic humiliation or theatrical ruin. It was getting to stand in the proof of who I had become, financially whole enough to rent a studio, steady enough to remain humane, precise enough to let the law be my partner. It was forcing them to look at the cost they had put on my childhood and pay it back in the currency they respected. It was also the private, quieter things, returning to my apartment with a new key that only fit my door, filling that studio with a light that no one else could dim, watching the ledger balance and feeling the returns like breath. There is a taste to revenge. It is sweet, but it is tempered by the knowledge of what was given up along the way, dinners that might have been gentle, family photos that will always hold the halves. Revenge pays you, but it takes from you too. The twist that makes people shift in their chairs is simple: the ones who look the least guilty are often the architects. Martin had been using the language of need to cover a habit that called for larger sums, online bets, quick wires, a pattern of empty promises turned into immediate demands. Evelyn had become the translator, shaping every line into something soft enough to swallow. When the town learned this, when the bank's investigators published the dry account of transfers and coached officers testified about the pattern of raids on my account, the community's applause rotted into a complicated quiet. Some of the relatives reached for their palms and pushed against the guilt. Some kept their own narratives. The revenge was not the fall, the revenge was the long, unavoidable daylight. Their defense smelled like all the old tricks: minimize, sentimentalize, rewrite. Each hearing shredded the familiar scripts of their lives, bank logs, testimonies from Maya and Eli, years of messages showing the same pattern. The court did not need narrative flair, it needed evidence. Evidence hates charm. It prefers cold numbers. There was a moment on a late afternoon when revenge folded into its most human shape. The judge read the decision that transferred restitution and ordered mandatory financial counseling as part of the restitution plan. It wasn't revenge the way the movies promise, no dramatic arrests and no fireworks, but there was a sentence in that ruling that read like the most exact kind of vindication: you will account for what you took and you will learn the cost of the story you told yourself. They had to face accountants and forms and explain their decisions to strangers who did not know them as parents but only as defendants. They had to walk through the financial rooms they'd used to improvise luck and explain them in a calendar filled with receipts. The town watched, and the town that once admired their polish found the cracks. The personal part of revenge is the hardest and the truest. I kept distance. I closed the door that used to open too easily. I let the relatives who chose spectacle choose it. I let those who offered small truths do what they could. I waited with a strange patience for something simple and satisfying, an apology that was not demand or deflection but a flat, honest, embarrassed thing. It came once, months later, in a voicemail Evelyn left after a hearing. She said, "I'm sorry, Jonah." She didn't have the words to undo what they had done and I didn't want them to have those words. I listened and I folded that apology into a small box of human things. I accepted nothing. Acceptance would let the wound do its work without asking for stitches. My notes were out of order in a way that smells like a hand. I called Maya first. She answered like she had been waiting and her voice folded into careful grief. She hinted at something large they'd been expecting. I wanted to be wrong. I called Eli. He said, "Don't argue, gather things, call the bank, preserve metadata." He said, "Get out without a scene if you can." I did it like a surgeon prepping a table. I packed the drive and the printed logs. I went through the house like a witness to my own life, narrating dates and times into my camera so there would be no question who held this evidence. The message from Evelyn hit my phone while I was zipping the bag. "We were only trying to protect you. Don't make it bigger than it needs to be." Protect, the word, folded and softened theft like gauze over a wound. For a second the child inside me reached toward a small, pointless compromise. But Dr. Carver's voice slid back through me. "You win by choosing a boundary and keeping it." I left the house with the cool iron certainty of someone who knows the terrible arithmetic of families and decides to make numbers tell the truth. I met Maya and Eli in a coffee shop that smelled of roasted beans and away-from-home safety. Eli had already called a sheriff's deputy. He coached me through requesting full access logs from the bank, preserving metadata, printing the logs, creating a chain of custody for evidence. Maya handed me an envelope of old napkin receipts, past messages, the small proof of a pattern. We worked until our coffee chilled. When we drove back to the house the next morning, the pool shimmered with a dissonant calm. I walked in first and placed my printed stack on the table. Martin's face moved from casual to tight like a door struggling in its frame. Evelyn's smile was a small, brittle thing. "I have the logs," I said. "The transfers happened while I was asleep in your house. If you want the moral of this story, here it is without the gloss: boundaries are as much an instrument of justice as any court. The system will only help you if you give it something to work with. The law is a slow and dull blade, but it cuts. Evidence is a truth machine. People who love you can also be people who hurt you, and the way they dress their hurt can make it feel ordinary. The choice you have is whether you let ordinary become your definition or whether you name the harm and demand accounting. My revenge was not a scream, it was a ledger and a locked door and a life rebuilt on terms I set. It was reclaiming what was mine in the only currency that mattered to them, accountability. If this story hits you, leave a comment and tell me where you're from. Tell me if you would have done the same or if you would have burned the house down in your heart. I read all of them. If you're new here, subscribe. I share stories like this because someone once shared one with me and it made me feel a little less alone. If this moves you, talk about it. Tell someone who needs to hear that boundaries are not betrayals. And finally, if you've ever had to choose between blood and dignity, tell me how you did it. The best revenge is a life that will not be opened and emptied again. Martin laughed something that tried to be contempt. Family comes first. We needed it more than you. Evelyn reached for the familiar script of guilt turning, of making me a villain for wanting a life of my own. If you really believe that, I said, then you won't mind what's next. I had no idea how loud my own words would be when they left my mouth. I told the deputy everything. I handed him my stack. I played the recordings of the text suggesting, "We're drowning, son," threaded through years of armor-stitching language. The deputy placed a freeze order on Martin and Evelyn's accounts, and the room folded inward on itself like a stage curtain. The first wave of revenge was quiet and bureaucratic, accounts frozen, bank investigations opened, subpoenas and pauses. But revenge is not only paperwork, revenge is a story told in a voice they cannot sell. I printed every transfer, every authorization, the device IDs, the IP geolocation lines that all pointed to their router. I took these to a civil attorney and to the sheriff. I did not shout our betrayal into the gossip mill. I let the law translate it into a language the community would understand. When the sheriff served the freeze, faces changed. Some shifted to anger that tasted like theater. Some filed away judgment like coins. Luca's hands, hovering over his laptop, finally pushed it toward me without meeting my eyes. It was the smallest admission of shame I'd ever seen, a silence that said I'm sorry without speech. But there is another level of revenge, one that comes slower and personal. Reclaim your story. I moved my life forward in the hourglass they tried to flip. I rented a small studio, plastered the walls with the light I'd saved, started taking clients, hung up work in frames like flags. The legal battle that followed was not clean, it was messy and long. Martin and Evelyn hired a lawyer who tried to reframe the narrative: family loans, emergency help, you should have known. The jingle of a pawn shop bell when I was 12 and the skateboard I saved for gone behind a counter that smelled of dust and nickel. The shoebox under my bed at 16 with the lid crooked and the cash thinned a week later. Evelyn smoothing everything with a phrase that rearranged anger into need: your father only needs one lucky break. One lucky break became a decade of broken promises. I left when I was 18 with $400 and a car that coughed up hills. Denver learned me by the smell after rain. I learned to sleep 4 hours and show up like 8. Community college came like oxygen. I kept a 3.9 because it was something I could control. Years pulled taut and then released. An internship at an agency turned into a job. I bought a second-hand suit that didn't itch. I paid myself slowly. Every bonus, every refund, every little extra went into one place: the account that whispered studio with white walls and light. $82,000 wasn't billionaire money, but it was everything that meant I could be steady in the face of a family that rewired history to serve its present. In the guest room where I woke, the banking app made a small geometry of cruelty: transfers between 2 and 4 in the morning, every authorization marked with my device. Device ID, IP logs, and timestamps pointing like compass needles back to the house I was staying in. I sat with that screen until the light drained from it. Panic wanted to rise, but years of sitting on couches and doing the hard work of boundaries had taught me another muscle, method. I took screenshots until my thumbs ached. I airdropped them to my laptop. I backed everything up on an external drive that lives in the strap of my backpack because I once learned the cost of keeping things only in one place. I filmed the house, details to the point of obsession, the grout, the fireplace edge, the angle of the pool's lip. I photographed my notebook and found the elastic band stretched like someone had hurried it.